those in power, the obvious advantage of keeping people in fear is that they are less likely to question what you then do to them, purportedly in the name of their own security. The hidden but perhaps greater advantage is that if any of them do ask you what you're doing, you can reply, "Can't tell you," because that could compromise your security. Thus has the Bush administration not only eavesdropped illegally on Americans, but it is also hidden behind the state secrets claim when its illegal wiretaps have been challenged in court. In our fourth story tonight, a top Republican is teaming up with no less than Senator Ted Kennedy to strip Mr. Bush of that protection. The Associated Press reporting that Republican Senator Arlen Specter is working on legislation to change the current system in which civil lawsuits against the Bush administration are routinely killed because the administration claims the suits would expose state secrets. Under Kennedy and Specter's proposed law, judges in these cases would be instructed to evaluate the administration's claim for secrecy rather than just accept it at face value, as many, if not most, do now. The bill may end up as part of the Senate's wiretapping law, due for a vote next month, after which the president will sign it and monkeys will fly out of his butt. On the premise that this might become law somehow, let's turn to constitutional law scholar Jonathan Turley, professor at George Washington University. John, good evening.
Hi, Keith.
Am I wrong about this? I mean, if you strip the politics away somehow from this and you ask every American about this topic, wouldn't they assume that this already was a law, that the government has to make at least some token effort to justify acting in secret against its own citizens?
Well, it actually is the law. You know, this has been a distortion or a mutation of the law. The privilege has become something that I think the Supreme Court never imagined when it first created it in a case called Reynolds. They stated in Reynolds they expected judges to try to minimize the scope of the privilege. But today, the privilege is used primarily not to keep something secret, but to keep something from being used against the government. In litigation like the Area 51 case that I litigated, we had a report that showed the government was lying. The court had the report, I had the report, the government had the report, but what the government didn't want is for the report to actually be used to prove that they're lying. And we've seen that in case after case. I was in a courtroom when people laughed when the government counsel argued that they could use the privilege to claim as secret something that was published on the cover of the New York Times. That's how grotesque the privilege has become.
Hence that phrase laughed out of the court. But as the Associated Press reported, some judges are already taking it upon themselves to, I guess, adhere to the original idea of the law and evaluate these secrecy claims by the administration. Why don't all of them do that?
I'm afraid part of the answer is that some judges are lazy, and some judges are not fulfilling their what should be a sacred duty as an Article III judge. You're given life tenure so that you shouldn't be afraid. But many judges just simply use this as an easy way to get out of a difficult problem. I have been in cases where the government was most clearly and certainly lying to the court, and the court did nothing to look at whether that allegation was true. And I think that's why congressional action is so needed here. You know, Reynolds itself, the original case, was built on a lie. It was, at the time, people believed the Air Force had lied to the court. Many years later, the family showed it was a lie, and a few years ago went back to the Supreme Court and said, look, here's the proof that you based this decision on a false representation by the government. And the Supreme Court refused to re-examine the case.
All right, with or without this new law, suppose one of the anti-wiretapping civil lawsuits succeeds. What does that legal victory actually mean then in terms of stopping the government or punishing Alberto Gonzales or any other top officials who were responsible for this?
Well, it could mean a lot, and that's one of the reasons there's a lot of people, both Democrats and Republicans, that don't want to see it happen. They don't want a court to say that the president did something that is a federal crime. That's why they're trying to get all these cases thrown out of court, because it is rather clear that what the president ordered was a federal crime, clearly defined in federal law. But that causes a problem, because many of the Democratic leaders and Republican leaders have promised each other that they would not start impeachment proceedings. But when a federal judge says the president committed a crime, it's pretty darn hard to ignore that.
Unless everything gets tabled until 2009, and let's say that this law does become the law of the land officially again, even though it's already on the books, the first act signed by President X in February 2009, would it offer a tool for prying the lid off some of the Bush administration's secrets sort of after the fact?
It would. Keith, if I could get one wish granted, it would probably be this, that we could put this genie back in the bottle in terms of the privilege and allow citizens to sue their government to prove things like crimes. If you look back at history, most of the great reforms were not brought forth by Congress or presidents. They were brought forth by citizens standing up to the government. The privilege is now a tool used to protect the government from its own crimes, and that's what we need to work on.
Professor Jonathan Turley of George Washington University, as always, sir, most harrowing, and great thanks anyway.
Thank you, Keith.